Okay. So we were talking about conflict, where conflict basically comes from, basically where its relationship exists between channel partners, why the difficulties happen, and also why conflict can be mitigated, even supported, especially when it does things like create the ability to see ourselves improve when we're able to understand what are the reasons why we're not able to do things successful. So balance power we talked about is the best way to reduce intolerance, but we also realize that balance power happens to be differentiated. There's many alternatives to power in the system. And so there is not a one-on-one way in which to measure the balance of power, but we do know simply that it is the better way to exist. Where there is an imbalance, of course, this is where dealers traditionally in the 80s and 90s had difficulty until one dealer came about and changed the balance of power in channels forever, Walmart. They were vulnerable to coercion, especially in the 80s and 90s when you were dealing with perhaps one or only two manufacturers of a given good. It meant that there were very few alternatives for the dealerships to be able to find different. Well, there's a few things you can do about that if you are in some form of conflict. Well, the first one is generally passive acceptance. You accept that especially for several good reasons. One of them is quite simply if you are profitable, there's no real reason for you to change things. If you still are not able to be able, or if you have this conflict, you can do that old-fashioned thing of just pounding the table, and it won't really create any actions. You can threaten to sell the line overall, or you can try to come into some constructive voice with your suppliers. And these are when you actively seek your suppliers out and actively voice your situations and your problems. So if you remember, as I said before, I've told you that there are constructive ways in which you can complain. And as consumers, that is one of your particular jobs. But what you're hopefully going to do is find some way in a discussion format to be able to express yourselves in words that they can accept. Well, why? You want to be able to avoid the possibility of being perceived as unfair if you're a supplier. Unfairness is relationship acid. There is no single greater impact in conflict when one of the partners perceives the other is unfair. Test question. It increases conflict. It also increases the negativity of the conflict itself. It exacerbates the issue. It reduces channel performance. And if there is no fairness accepted, then there may be no relationship. And we'll talk about fairness also in the next chapter. What will happen is the channel members will associate those negative feelings. The expectation is you're being taken advantage of. It also means that you start to personalize the issues. It becomes part of organizational memory because it's passed from one particular employee to another. And as you remember, coercive power is the worst because it involves the creation of conflict and the seeking of retribution. And it is a negative spiral and will go again and again and again. So remember, functional conflict is not only acceptable, but it can be good. But when conflict is also paired with unfairness, then you have a very difficult situation to manage. Well, is it even possible to manage conflict? If the expectation is we're always going to be at loggerheads with each other, is it possible for groups and organizations to find some common ground? And there is. Matter of fact, we find common ground in the university and most major organizations. How do you take care of conflict? You institutionalize it. You accept that conflict is a constant state, ready-made to spring up at any moment because the basic dynamic forces are built to create it. So what you do is you accept that it exists and you find ways to institutionalize it so that it is dealt with in a common manner. There are things within the organizations in which can resolve conflict between departments. This is outside of the organization. We're talking about channel members, suppliers, wholesalers, retailers. So how do we institutionalize it outside of our organizations? We create joint memberships. We create trade organizations. We have distributor councils. We exchange information back and forth with each other. It creates the possibility of risk because as we share information, we can share secrets sometimes as well. And that is the ultimate extent of where conflict might end and trust begins. When the IBM PC was first introduced in 1983, one of the things that they did was they decided that they were going to publish the engineering diagrams of the IBM PC itself. What that meant is that instead of setting competitors against each other, it allowed competitors to finalize on a single unified design. In the sharing of that information, microcomputers went from 800,000 for the Apple Model 3 to within 3 years over 40 million of the IBM PC. Sometimes the sharing of information can grow. And so you first put those organizations in place, you share information together, because that also breaks down the barriers. And then you put into play organizational structures that when things cannot be resolved, you can find ways of finding common ground. And so these are labor boards, these are the courts, and this is where arbitration and mediation come in. The courts is not the best place, by the way, to do these things because the court believes in winner take all. And if you're on one side or another, you might find that it's just easier to find some level of agreement. And I can give you an example of that in the name of this guy by the name of Curt Flood. So baseball in the 60s and professional sports, the team in which you played for owned your contract and your ability to play from the moment that your contract started till it ended and controlled where you could go if you were going to be traded. It was a pretty tough situation for athletes because there was a semi-collusion agreement between the owners, even though they say that didn't exist. Haha. Curt Flood came along and said, I want to be able to play for any team that I wish. And at that time, the baseball owners basically shut Curt Flood out and he went to court. He went from court from 1967 to 1976, and in 1976 obtained the right of free agency for all other athletes, because by this time, Curt Flood was no longer able to play baseball. But he did one great thing. He brought freedom to the individual players and to the players from now on. They owe him a debt of gratitude. Fast forward, baseball is still in some form of arbitration, or let's just say that baseball still has this ability to have some control, and the baseball players were wanting to strike again, and they did. And this is when the baseball strike took away the World Series in 1996. And because of the bad press for the players who were the ones who walked out, it meant that there was no World Series at that time. So what happened? The baseball players had to go back to work, and they gave up or just wanted one thing. They wanted to have the right of what is known as arbitration. Now, before we go on to arbitration, I want to speak to mediation, which is generally out there. Mediation does not have the ability to fix a solution. Mediation is exactly what you would see like on Star Trek, where you have two warring parties and the captain shows up and try to get them to agree to each other. But basically, they don't have any legal ability to settle disputes. So usually good mediators find some kind of common ground to be able to speak on. And once they find common ground, then hopefully there's an agreement, but there's nothing binding. Arbitration is. Arbitration, a third party makes a decision, and both parties state in advance that they will honor whatever the decision is. Arbitration you find basically in industries that are considered the national interest, railroads, airplanes, those kind of things. That's compulsory arbitration. You're required by law to submit your disputes, and then the decision is final and binding, usually a federal judge. Voluntary arbitration is when both parties submit to a dispute and the decision is final and binding. Voluntary arbitration is also when you can't come up with any other solution. And this is what the baseball players asked for. And the owners willingly agreed. If baseball players could not be able to settle a contract, they could ask for third-party arbitration by a federal judge, and the baseball owners accepted. How do you think the baseball players did? Want to guess? Two ways, you can't get wrong. I mean, one or the other. Who made out most? Players or owners?
Players.
On the button. Because for years, just by the very nature that they were able to do that, all salaries in professional sports had been stunted up to that point. What the players started to, and as I said before, remember I said, when you go to court, it's winner take all. So judges looked at the historical background of salary structures and fees and decided that quite simply baseball or professional sports in general were understated by a factor of like 3 or 4. And so you started having players automatically go to arbitration that were making $400,000 one year. And after going through arbitration, we're making 12 million. Or you started to see for 20 years, 15, from 96 to 2011, players were not even factoring their salaries. They were going straight into arbitration because everything was on their side. And it wasn't until 2001 before that finally caught up. But by that time, you had guys like Ronaldo making 80 million a year, and that was those times. And now we're talking triple-digit salaries now, all because of arbitration, and all because the baseball owners were unwilling to find a way to institutionalize this and make it work. This is also, by the way, the name, image, and likeness things that are going on right now. It's all a failure, I think, of the NCAA to address this issue. And I think a lot of that also has to do, my own personal feeling is that they're so in bed with the SEC. My words, okay? Okay, and I come from SEC area, so I can speak honestly. All right. So we talked about finding ways to institutionalizing it, but it's more than just that. It's the way that we act and the way that we work around each other. Relational norms are the expected ways of behavior. how do we conduct ourselves in our day-to-day activity, which help avoid conflict and promote functional conflict, good conflict? Well, we have three ways that we can do it. One is that we can have flexibility. We can have not as much hard edges about the way our decisions are made, and find willingness to accept the minor things that ultimately don't mean a difference when it comes to performance. The next is that we can willingly exchange information with each other, and this is where transparency comes in. And this is the openness to be able to express not only your concerns, but wherever you think better things can be done. And then finally, whatever way you can do it is to achieve some level of solidarity. We're in this together. And make it count not just merely as a spoken word, but as in actions as well. And so success means success somewhere in a system-wide level for the whole group. Everybody wins, everybody promotes. It doesn't happen all the way. We have to make sure that those that are the best are given their due courses as well. But we find that we can all pull together and find success. Remember, this is also between interpersonal organizations that are both independent and need each other as well. All of these things can forestall conflict. The norms that normally emerge from daily interactions. The norms can be positive or negative, but as long as we focus on accentuating the negative, we can hope to eliminate the negative. How's that? If we accentuate the positive, we eliminate the negative. That's his old song, excuse me. So I want to also basically, before I go on this, there's two other discussions that are going to come up. And they're talking about justice and fairness. You'll also see this word put as justice. As part of relational norms, it is very important for us to promote both of these in our day-to-day activities. And what they basically mean is procedural fairness is being treated fairly in our day-to-day activities. And then in distributive justice, it is being treated fairly in the distribution of rewards. And so what this basically means is that in your normal activity, in the day-to-day environment, you are not, what's the word I want to use? You're basically not only just being fair, but you're treating the person in a respectful and decent manner that you would treat the same as anyone else. It doesn't sound hard, does it? But you'd be surprised how some things happen in normal business life. Just treat someone generally acceptably well in the normal day-to-day activities. This is between channel partners and people too. In fairness, distributed fairness and justice, what that means in many ways is we're all paid on the same salary grade. We all receive the same rewards and benefits in relationship to ourselves and our results as well. For organizations and companies, what this means is that contracts are there and vital, important so that they clearly spell out what is success between different groups of organizations. And when you achieve given goals, a Walmart gets just as much as the mom and pop store if they achieve on the same level. That's what distributive fairness means. And if you practice these things, if you create these relational norms, it makes everything run a whole lot smoother. So, how do we go about resolving conflict? What are the speaking mechanisms or the action mechanisms that we can use? Well, all of us have one of these styles or another, so let's kind of talk them through. So avoidance basically seeks to prevent any conflict. You'll agree to anything. And this is a very successful short-term solution. If you need a short-term solution, especially for what is considered to be a short-term problem, then by all means do it. If it is a problem, however, that is built on some issues at a fundamental level, then avoidance will not work. All of these basically, by the way, have a purpose or a goal, and it just depends on how well we use it. All of these things are tools. Accommodation means that I strengthen the relationship. I hope to cultivate the dependence of that particular partner by listening to their needs and desires and providing them if I possibly can. Works to a given level, all right? It does not resolve conflict when it is open and manifest, but what it does is it, use that bad word, minimizes conflict by simply avoiding it or accommodating it for that moment. And it depends really on whether or not those particular issues are just simply not germane to the overall long-term goals. So competition between channel partners makes no sense whatsoever. The competitor pursues their own goals. Even Walmart, with their particular power, accommodates their channel partners as well. When they were doing their best to put in the vendor management system in the 90s and requiring their vendors to spend thousands of dollars, they showed them the golden prize of being able to see all of their goods in every Walmart shelf all over the world at that time. And so they were not in competition with their partners. So compromise is basically where you try to get each side to achieve their goals, and hopefully that finds a way of making success. But as we all know about compromise, you get a little bit, you don't get a lot. And so compromise can be successful if, in the long-term goal, the situation that created it will dissolve away. But if that doesn't dissolve away, then we're in trouble, okay? And then finally, the one that seeks to get it all, which is problem solving, which is my goals, my counterparts. I look at both levels and we try to find a way to fix this thing together. And that requires also long-term commitment. Now, the one that isn't in here that I talk about a lot is, I believe firmly in winner take all. And by that, what I mean is that if I cannot express my goals in a way in which I can convince another person, if their desires are stronger and make more sense than my own, then I believe that that's the best course to pursue. Trust me, it's a great way to stay married, okay? And I mean, yeah, I'm kind of kidding, but the truth is that that's really the way to go. It is. I don't, if I can't care about it any, then there's no reason to care about it at all. It is winner take all when you look at it as a solution. If you've got the ability to drop it, is probably the easiest and best way to go through life, my own opinion. Click, please. There you go. Wait, okay. Now, let us not forget that, cash is always a great way to solve problems. If we appeal to the economic self-interest of the organization that we are trying to deal with, and if we can show them that our basic argument will lead to a substantial or a better economic outlook, then they are much more willing to listen to us. This could be done in something as simple as a cash award or stipends. There's all ways that you can incentivize this. But remember also, if we go back to our original 5 sources of power, this is reward power. And as we talked about with reward power, the difficulty is the rewards become difficult to administer. That you might find that you're having to do reward after reward after reward, and ask pizza companies how wonderful it is to just come out with one discount, and that'll be enough, and you'll never have to do it again. So as a measure to resolve conflict, it's good in the short term once again, if you can handle the short term. And so with those ways to resolve conflict and having all of these ways to be able to solve our issues, we can slide out about managing conflict. Now let's move on to chapter 12. Bet, doctor. Have a good day. Okay. She's great. We were lucky to get her. She's actually from Louisiana Tech. Interesting thing, she graduated 10 years after I did. We both have like the same coin that we come with. And yeah, she's awesome. Anyway. Channel relationships. So we're on the last chapter, chapter 12. And we talked about power, we talked about conflict, and now how do we make things happen for the long run and stay with the channel partners that we have, and how do we make them grow? What is our understanding of long-term commitment and trust? We go back and we look at what we had seen before. When we talk about Morgan Hunt, commitment and trust, this is where basically the heart of what this particular article came up with, or let's just say the focus of a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about right now. So we're going to have 2 things we're going to talk about that are real important, 3 issues actually. We're going to talk about commitment, we're going to talk about trust, and we're going to talk about the stages of a relationship as they're dealing with we're talking about businesses. So I want to just visit a couple of things that we talked about before. I wanted to run through their particular things that they said were vital and important. Let's see. So when you look at the model of what they talk about and how those things are valued and how they affect each other, there's power, coercive power, what it does in conflict, talks about acquiescence, relationship commitment, trust, cooperation. All of these are basic concepts that this particular book this particular chapter does. And yes, you'll probably find that as a bonus question, at least who wrote the relationship theory. Morgan and Hunt, 1994. So what has brought about a greater need for understanding channel relationships? Chapter 9 talked about the emerging channels, what is going to be happening in the future. And one of the things that we talked about is that economy or services have started to shift dramatically. We have major issues that have pushed relationships more important than ever. Shift to service economies, an aging population, which requires trust more than at any other time, and global competition, and the difficulty with products being commoditized. In other words, one product is just like another. And those are the reasons why, more than ever, we need to find long-term solutions in channel structures. And this at a time when trust is at an all-time low as well. We do that by building relationships. Relationships are connections that bind organizations together, and the binding is not through corporations, it is through people. Relationships, good working relationships, are enduring. They're significant in that they add markedly to the success of both organizations. And those are what we call, once again, the golden handcuffs, that there is reward by staying together. So we talked about relational governance before. We talked about it just as a word, but this is the actual practice of it. This is where the day-to-day norms of work just make it advantageous to do it. So how do we know that there is a good relationship? A good relationship has a genuine commitment. Commitment exists when one organization wishes to bind itself to another organization indefinitely. It's hard to really look at what a commitment is. I don't think it is an attitude or an intention, all of those that it might say that it is. But I think commitment comes through actions. It is not the things that organizations say that matter at all. It is what the organizations do in order to maintain and commit themselves to each other. And like most good relationships, or like a lot of relationships, they're actually encumbering. It means that there is not necessarily the need or the expectation that you and your partners have a limited relationship. But the relationship is limited in the number of outside parties that you have. You impose obligations. There are benefits and costs of staying in the relationships. And those benefits and costs are why organizations stay together. Sounds an awful like the last person you dated, doesn't it? I told you it'd be like Dr. Phil in here. And it is kind of funny because it's not like they write this stuff like it's Dr. Phil, but it sure sounds like it sometimes. Just remember that asymmetric commitment, it does not work. It is a uncommon. Asymmetric relationships where one group doesn't necessarily care as much as the other generally defines itself, like I said, by the actions. And if the actions don't speak to your intentions, then you have an issue. Commitment is defined by a long-term horizon. Stretches ad infinitum. It requires a willingness to sacrifice and expand, maintain the relationship when even abandonment might seem desirable. Want to keep the relationship going. There's an active desire by that. And it is a powerful reason for you to stay together. So why do upstream members want strong channel relationships? Strong relationships with downstream channel members weather time. I've been a long discusser about steel tools and their commitment and willingness to stay with their particular dealer network, even though it's generally individuals. Steel tools does not sell itself in home improvement centers. They do sell online, but they also have commitments to the store owners so that they can service those particular tools. Steel tools will pay for 30% of a new addition of a dealer's location, even if it has nothing to do with steel tools, because they believe the commitment is important. Well, one of those reasons why is that when it comes to major changes, especially if you're moving into new territory, which steel did about 5 or 10 years ago when they moved into electric tools, you have a strong commitment in your downstream membership, and they're willing to help you achieve success because you've already seen that you're willing to help them. It's this powerful barrier to other individuals wanting to come in and take advantage of that particular opportunity. Successful dealerships always have the desire to be more successful. And yet, steel dealerships, 2/3 of them are steel dealerships only. So they do not sell Husqvarna or any of the other brands. So this is one of the reasons why, as an upstream partner, if I have a strong commitment with my downstream members, you won't be going through the back and forth that happens with a lot of other corporations. Why would you want to if you're downstream partners? If I have a strong dealer network, that makes me different from another dealer network. And by that, what I mean is that I can offer services that perhaps others can't. I have been amazed at DoorDash's downstream channels that they have got running. And I am amazed by the willingness of the DoorDashers out there by what they're willing to do. Especially when especially if you look at Uber and some of the other partners who have difficult relationships. And I would like to find that out. But I think what they've done is they built strong relationships with upstream, and that they're being rewarded very handily. It also means that DoorDash has invested in them by allowing them to deliver in as many possible places they can. And the value services that DoorDash brings is unparalleled to many of the others. Because I'm a DoorDasher, I keep seeing new offerings that they come up with every week. It's just amazing. And why do you do it? Why do you do it? What's the only reason to do anything in business? I said it in chapter 4, 5. Yes, return on investment. That's the only reason you do anything in business. okay? It leads to profit, okay? You maintain a competitive advantage. There will come a day when you'll need something from another partner and you're gonna find they're gonna deliver for you, and it's based on only one thing, and that's because they like you. That's how it happens, okay? Not everything can be written down, but you can find ways many times that are not in the book that are taken care of just by it because you have a good relationship. And let's see. Oh, let me just finish this and we're done. Okay, so it all pays off. Okay, you have greater loyalty, you have higher sales together, you have greater cooperation. It drives trust, but trust is necessary but not sufficient. And so what I mean by that is you cannot make this work without trust, but you need a few more things. What you do get is you get a very strong confidence, knowing that somebody's got your back. Not easy, but relationships take time. And how do we know all this stuff? Well, we did some research about this for about 20 years. So if you ever hear what's called meta-analysis, basically what this, when you don't have a research project, you do meta-analysis, which means you gather all a bunch of other analysis and you run it through and you see interesting patterns. Not all the time. But in meta-analysis basically is analysis of journal articles. And what they do is though all the articles can be very difficult, that they're all written for particular purposes, you can kind of focus on common themes. And so they did this research on relationships, and they had 38,000 total data sets that they were using. And so what this means is relationships have a strong effect on word of mouth. That's what WOM is. The R means how significant or how much of that can I explain? And so if I have a relationship, a good one, how much of that can I explain? And word of mouth, the R, is significant. It says you can explain a lot of why positive word of mouth comes from relationship. Loyalty is the same thing. And then overall performance, that return on investment is 35. Those are very strong numbers. And so ending with this is basically is that relationships work. How do we know why? Because we have research that tells us. Okay, we are done for today. We are going to come back Tuesday and finish up relationships.